Good morning, everybody. Our first declared war as an independent country was the War of 1812. And it did not go well for us in many areas. And it was on this date, August 24 in 1814, that we were embarrassed as the British came into Washington, D.C., burned the Capitol, burned the White House, which was then called the Executive Mansion, and other buildings. A low point for the Americans. Here's a map of Europe of 1810, and the British are deep in their war with Napoleon. So when the War of 1812 started, their number one focus was on Europe and not on the New World. But when Napoleon was defeated and exiled, Britain could turn its attention to its war with the United States. The early phases of the War of 1812 were mostly on Lake Erie and Lake Ontario. And this map shows where some of that fighting happened. But when Britain no longer had to worry about Napoleon, they were able to send more ships and troops to the United States, and they focused on the Chesapeake Bay area where they could be very mobile because of their strong navy. And note Baltimore and in Washington here. So the British attacked Washington via Bladensburg, where our militia and army performed very poorly. This is known as the Bladensburg races because our guys just ran away. So they walked into Washington, D.C. Here's President Madison. War of 1812 is sometimes called Mr. Madison's War. And he had to get out of the White House in a hurry. When the British sappers came in, they found the table set with food. That was like a big banquet was about to happen. And his wife, Dolly Madison, was responsible for saving certain things, particularly the big portrait of Washington. And she had help with this from servants and slaves who were there. So when they got out of the White House, they went over to Brookville, Maryland, and they stayed in this house. And you can visit it today. And Brookville is known as the United States Capitol for a day. So the British first focused on the Capitol building, where they put it to flame. And some of the things that were destroyed were early documents related to our country's history, the kind of thing you'd find in the archives today. They then went down Pennsylvania Avenue to burn the White House. Some theories are this was in retaliation for some things we had destroyed up on Lake Erie and Lake Ontario. And even the Brits themselves weren't in agreement on what to burn. They did burn the Treasury, but they seemed to get tired of burning the big buildings, and citizens came out and implored them to stop. And so that's kind of a weird part of the story, too. They did go down to the Washington Navy Yard, where we had already set some of our own things on fire, including a couple ships that were being built, and things like gunpowder and such. Well, a few days later, a big storm came up the Chesapeake and put out the fires. Buildings that had been weakened by fire collapsed because of the weight of the water. And Congress met here in the old brick Capitol. They met here for 4 years. It has since been demolished, and it's now where the Supreme Court is, while the Capitol was being fixed and other buildings that had been burned. In December of 1814, we signed a peace treaty with Britain in Ghent, Belgium, pictured here, called the Treaty of Ghent. But because it took so long for news to travel across the ocean, this battle happened in January of 1815, the Battle of New Orleans. Here you see Andrew Jackson heroically leading the troops, and of course he becomes president later. Now this is the portrait of Washington that was saved. There's only one other thing in the White House from that time period. It's a little piece of furniture, so not much in the White House today from 1814. Years ago, Dorothy and I had a tour of the White House, and parts of it were being repainted, and the original burn marks from the fire of 1814 were still visible. And the Star-Spangled Banner was part of that campaign on the Chesapeake. when the Brits attacked Baltimore and Fort McHenry, right up the road from Washington.